What's up, everyone? It's Russo. I hope everyone is doing well. Please follow my Instagram at RussoLifts. Just in case something happens to this YouTube channel, you can follow, message, and you can watch my daily story content on Instagram. I'll see you there. What's up, everyone? It's Russo. I hope everyone is doing well. Today I'm going to be talking about my near-death experience with the Generation Iron documentary, which is called Enhanced 2. I believe it is releasing at the end of the month. The trailer is already out. Go check it out. But basically, the premises of Enhanced 2 is more about transformations, talking about how many people actually use PEDs but don't admit to it. And basically, I was called in to be in the 1 week extreme muscle gain transformation. Now, I already have vlogs that are behind the scenes of this documentary, so go check them out if you're new to the channel. Basically, the whole thing was how much muscle with, all the PEDs in the world could I gain in a week. I think I gained, I forget the exact numbers off the top of my head, but we did DEXA scans, and I think it said I gained it was some ridiculous number. It was like an overinflated number because DEXA scans aren't that accurate, but I think it said I gained 13, 14 pounds of muscle. I think I gained 20 pounds in a week in total. Now, this is a bit deceiving because I fasted for 3 days before starting the cycle, and the fast is very important when you're trying to do some extreme change like that. Basically, the whole premise was priming my body for this extreme change and then putting my body in a starvation state, so when the gear kicks in, when the food comes back in, I absorb it all like a sponge, and I'm very sensitive to the androgens. This will give me the best chance of putting on the most amount of actual lean body mass in a week possible. In my opinion, overall, I think I gained 2 to 4 pounds of actual muscle tissue in a week, which is absolutely ludicrous. I think a natural, after his his noob gains are over, his natty gains are over, can expect to gain 1 to 2 pounds of muscle per year. With this experiment, I did it in a week, and it was due to massive amounts of hyperplasia caused from insane HGH dosage for a week, combined with insulin, combined with anabolics and injectable SARMs. It was a crazy week, and it was exhausting. With the HGH, you think I'm grumpy on MK677. The GH protocol was brutal, and yeah, I wouldn't really want to repeat that week. It was not like this fun vacation of hanging out with the EA crew and everything. It was very much like I was constantly falling asleep all day. But that ties into the near-death experience from it that wasn't caught on camera, wasn't caught in the documentary. I kept this to myself so I could do my own video, capitalize on my own idiotic mistakes, and not be made an example of in this documentary. Because if you guys are new to the channel, I already had a run-in with ESPN with their documentary where I played the nice guy, where I really tried to sit down and work with them, and then they just made me out like the character they wanted to make me. So, I was going in with that mentality. I've already tried these documentaries, I've already tried this mainstream media stuff, and personally, I like to have control over my own narrative with my own content. So, yeah, I was going to keep this to myself, but basically, this is the only kind of dive into insulin I take on this channel. I'm not a fan of insulin in bodybuilding. I think that too many people utilize insulin that have no business utilizing it, and you can die from insulin. It can easily go into hyperglycemic shock, and basically I'm going to go into what happened to me personally. But yeah, the risk to reward ratio of insulin is very high, in my opinion, with little reward. It's all fake. Again, you can get benefits out of insulin if you're carrying an extreme, I'm talking an extreme amount of abnormal lean body mass. you can get benefits out of insulin, but most people utilizing insulin, in my opinion, they're not on the level to be using it. Just my opinion. But then again, you can make the argument of factor that insulin should be utilized along with HGH to stop chronic high blood sugar and to constantly keep the insulin sensitivity there. So I understand why it's there. I just think insulin and HGH are looked at the holy grail, the missing component in people's cycles, that's why they don't look like that. My opinion, no. Definitely in the top level of extreme, juice to the max bodybuilding, it plays a role, but too many people are just messing around with HGH and insulin who have no idea what they're doing, in my opinion. And yeah, I'm gonna keep that opinion because it's true. So for those who don't know, MK677, I talk about the current cycle, how I'm losing insulin sensitivity, meaning when HGH is present, then insulin is not. So you need insulin to have an insulin response, meaning that when you have like a diabetic, when you have chronically high blood sugar all the time, most of what you eat gets converted into fat. When you have insulin sensitivity, insulin is the anabolic carrier that transports it into your muscles. So when you utilize exogenous HGH, especially in the extreme dosages used in this documentary, insulin is going to play a factor in the protocol, so you just don't get fucking fat, and it actually, all the nutrients, food, and drugs goes into the right place. So I was not a fan of utilizing insulin. I understand why it was needed in this protocol, and I want to say right off the bat that this was not Tony or Trevor or anyone's fault. My own fault. I was forced to do nothing there. This was all voluntarily me, and I honestly like playing a role in this documentary, even though personally diving in mentally, I just was not in the right state of mind to be in this documentary. If you guys are new to my channel, you can go check out my sarms, steroids, and depression video to kind of see where my mind was at that time. Basically, I was in this horrible depression. Everything was going wrong in my personal life. And at this time, I moved in with my girl's sister, and she dates an alcoholic. And I should have just moved out on my own. I wanted to save some money on rent, and there's always a price to pay. So my home life was horrible at that time. I was being exposed to all this stress that really I didn't play a role in, or I didn't need to be around. I just wanted to save some money on rent. I should have just paid rent. But anyways, Tony offered me to be in this documentary. A lot of people, I think, in life get thrown bones and they don't take them. I'm always going to take the bones I'm thrown and try and make something out of them. So even though I really did not want to be in this documentary at this time, was not in the mindset to be in this documentary at this time, and personally my skin looked horrible. I was kind of letting myself go over that year and a half. I'm starting to put myself back together now. I was not going to let this opportunity slip by, so I decided to be in it. So the minute I get there, I'm briefed on what the protocol was. We went back and forth, and I dumbed down the protocol. It was a bit more extreme than I wanted to do. I really didn't have a worry, considering it was only a week. I did not agree to do the 30-day crazy cycle transformation. I was fine with doing a week. Reason being is side effects take a while to accumulate. So the whole premise of this documentary was a healthier approach to extreme cycling, meaning that basically a little tiny blast to get more results, grab the results, and then maintain them on lower dosages, theoretically is better and more healthier than a steroid blast over a long period of time, causing more mutation, causing more time for side effects to accumulate. That is the whole basis of this documentary. I don't know if it's going to be communicated in the final take of the documentary, but that is the theory behind Trevor and Tony's idea of this cycle and the idea of the 1 week cycle. Getting into my near-death experience. So I already told you I was mentally in a horrible place going in, flying in. They made me fast for 3 days, meaning I had no food for 3 days. Only water, again, like I said earlier in this video, to prime my body for this cycle, to give myself the best chance of making the best results. That being said, I've never fasted before. The only extreme dieting experience I have is back in my wrestling days when I would cut weight for wrestling. I would make the 145 or 138 pound weight class when I would walk around 153. So the cuts weren't that brutal, but that's really the only experience I have. I've never went days without eating. So when I show up to Sacramento, man, my mind is just looped out from not eating at all for 3 days straight. I look, starved, obviously, and my face is sunken in. You can go see this footage. It's all on my YouTube channel. Just Google the enhanced transformation. So mentally, my brain was kind of fried starting off this transformation. Then you add in the HGH. HGH is really only present naturally when you're sleeping. MK677 gives you a good idea of how lethargic it can get. But when you go into the dosages utilized in this cycle, it's like MK677 on steroids, obviously. MK677 can really only mimic 2 to 3 units max, more like 1 to 2 units max of endogenous HGH, because it's a pituitary signaler, meaning your pituitary gland can only really chuck out 2 units, 3 maybe. But the dosages in the cycle are much higher to cause much more hyperplasia in a short period of time, meaning more cell splitting, meaning more chance of new permanent muscle cells. But that means way more lethargy. I was never awake. If you see the vlogs on my channel, you'll see how miserable I look. It was like I was never fully awake for a week. It was very hard for me to focus whatsoever. So I also explained in this video how insulin is needed to maintain insulin response when there's that much HGH exogenously added in. So to keep insulin response, it just caused me from gaining fat and to adjust my blood sugar, because HGH was going to have me at chronically high blood sugar levels unless we were utilizing things like slim pills, metformin, and then insulin during this protocol. Otherwise, I'd have chronically high blood sugar, my pancreas would be cranked, and everything would be converted to fat because my insulin sensitivity would be completely fucked up without manually adjusting it with metformin, slim pills, or straight up insulin. So I was briefed on insulin. I'm not going to go into dosages because this is YouTube, but basically the margin of insulin is very low for air. So me being a dumbass and me being half asleep, me being mentally in that state, I misjudged a dosage on day 1, 2, I think it was 2 or 3. I misjudged very badly. Like I read basically I added a 0 onto the dosage that I was supposed to utilize, and it was just, my brain was in autopilot mode. I really had no idea that I did it until I was pinning it, okay? Then I'm like, whoa! And I take the syringe out of me and I'm like, Jesus. So for those who don't know how insulin works, basically every unit injected. Now I do want to preface and be the devil's advocate here and say there are 12-year-old girls who are type 1 diabetic, who use insulin their whole life, never have an issue with insulin, never have any sort of near-death experiences with insulin. That being said, with bodybuilding, the dosages are much more extreme and the margin of error is much more extreme with carb intake. Basically, the role of insulin generally on the thumb is 10 units of carbs per unit of insulin. Otherwise, you're going to redline your hypoglycemic. You're going to redline, otherwise you're going to redline and go hypo, because you need those carbs. This is not a natural insulin response when you're adding exogenous insulin in. So the 10 units per 1 unit of the 10 grams of carbs per 10 unit of the 10 grams of carbs per 1 unit of insulin rule is very critical. So I'm not going to go into the exact dosage I accidentally pinned for my 3rd time utilizing insulin, but I'll say basically to stop myself from passing out and going to hypoglycemic shock and possibly dying, I instantly needed to take in around 400 to 550 carbs depending on my sensitivity. So luckily I was in the picture perfect environment to combat this issue. Now I was super embarrassed when I did it at the time, and I didn't tell anyone. I thought if I got really close to passing out, I would start screaming or something, and then they would take me to the hospital and revive me. I really didn't want to have this on camera, so I just poker faced the whole fucking thing. Again, I'm Robot Russo, so it's really not that hard for me to poker face, even though I'm in a near-death experience, basically. So I started going into hyperglycemic shock, which if you don't know what that is, I was trembling like crazy. Luckily, I'm in the EA house. This EA house is prepared for all these bodybuilders making these transformations on insulin, meaning there is literally stacks of candy in this house. So I instantly go over to the pantry and start eating as many fucking gummy worms as I can. Now, my insulin is still redlining even though I'm shoving as much gummy worms into my mouth as possible. I then went to the fridge and grabbed like 3 things of fruit juice and was just chugging them, trying to hit the 400 to 550 gram carb limit to stop myself from passing out. If I didn't intake that amount of carbs within this time frame of the first tail of insulin hitting, it was a 2-tailed insulin, meaning I would have to combat it later, but obviously as long as I could get through the first one, I would be good. So I chugged like 2 things of orange juice, I ate all this candy, I was just eating as much candy as possible, still trembling the whole time, meaning the insulin was still redlining me. I could pass out at any moment and go into hyperglycemic shock. You know, luckily there was people there. If I were to go into hyperglycemic shock, I would be able to be revived. But the whole point of this story is, and I'm going to relate it to Dallas McCarver because I do think this played a role in Dallas McCarver's death, was if there was no one watching me and there was no one there to save me and 911 didn't come fast enough and I had no carbs around me, then I would have for sure went into hypoglycemic shock. I would have passed out, and then it would have been the ambulance game waiting to get there to revive me. Insulin is no joke in the bodybuilding dosages. It should not be messed around with. I understand it needs to play a role when exogenous HGH is added in, even in therapeutic doses. What I see from people who submit me their blood glucose levels is that it needs to play a role, or at least insulin mimetics or glucose disposal agents like metformin being pharmaceutical, or glucose disposal agents like Burbine, Slim pills. There's a bunch of glucose disposal agents on the market. It needs to play a role. But if I wasn't in the picture perfect household, the perfect environment to play around insulin, I would have passed out. I would have passed out and entered hypoglycemic shock. If I did not dial 911 fast enough, I would have died for sure. If I didn't have people around me watching me, knowing that I was on insulin and there was no one there, I would have died. And then if I didn't dial 911 fast enough, I would have died. And if there was no carbs in the house, it would have happened so much faster. So luckily, I played the entire poker face role. I did not budge at all, even though I was trembling. I did not freak out. I knew exactly what I had to do to combat the issue. If someone didn't know the rule of thumb of 10 units of insulin per 1 unit of, or 10 grams of carbs per 1 unit of insulin, They probably wouldn't have known what to do. I knew exactly what to do. I knew what I was getting myself into. I knew the fire I was playing with at the time. But it causes that one little lapse in judgment. Now, I did an extreme misdosing, but this can be done on a much lower scale if you don't have the amount of carbs needed to balance the insulin. So, yeah, it was an eye-opening experience. I'm really glad I did poker face it, so GI did not get to put that in the documentary, and I get to explain the story exactly how I want to explain it and to warn people about insulin. But yeah, I was completely brain dead from being so lethargic on that GH dosage, and then my personal life being such shit at the time, as well as fasting for 3 days, that basically on an insulin syringe, instead of counting the individual marks as 100 units, I accidentally added a 0 on just going to the big number, which is, believe it or not, a lot of people actually do, and a lot of people do go into hypoglycemic shock from dosing. But it was a very stupid mistake that could have cost me at least a hospital visit, possibly my life if no one was around me and no carbs were in the household and I couldn't dial 911 fast enough, or 911 didn't come in time. So insulin's no fucking joke. It's really shouldn't be played around with, in my opinion. I understand why it plays a role, but miscalculation can result, especially in the extreme dosages, because I know a lot of big bodybuilders that carry a lot of lean body mass who want to have all these carbs shoved in their muscles. The more body mass you carry, the more these giant super heavyweights carry, the more insulin is needed to fill their muscles out or to balance the massive HGH dose they're on. So yeah, it's not like the dose was extreme, especially for my third time utilizing insulin. But it's not uncommon. Actually, I know of a lot of people who dose insulin higher than what my almost fatal dose was, again, if I wasn't in the perfect environment. So I really did want to tell that story. Again, this is just for education, showing my mistakes. I'm not really out here promoting or going against insulin. Again, I will play devil's advocate one more time and say there are type 1 diabetics, 12-year-old, 10-year-old boys, 10-year-old girls who use insulin all the time, but they're using like a therapeutic dose, right? They're using a normal insulin dose. They never have issues. They might go hypo a little bit, but the minute you step into the bodybuilding realm of insulin, the dosages get much higher because there's much more lean body mass and there's much more insulin sensitivity balancing going on with insulin and HGH. It's really not worth it for most people, but the margin of error becomes much more extreme when it comes to balancing the carb response. And when there's two-tailed insulins, meaning there's an initial wave of insulin rush and then there's a second wave, maybe you combated the first wave of insulin response, but you're out and about, your blood sugar's crashing, and then that second wave of insulin hits with a two-tailed. Again, if you don't have the carbs around you, if you don't have someone around you, you could go into hypoglycemic shock and die. This is not a natural insulin response. This is all exogenously produced, meaning all the checks and balances are gone, and you need to manually coordinate and combat each issue with exogenous carbs. And if you don't have access to them, there's not someone around you, and 911's not going to come fast enough, you could easily wind up 10 feet under in a coffin because of insulin. I do think that played a role in Dallas McCarver's death, because he was so massive. His dosage of insulin was probably massive. There was no one in the house, and he thought he could balance it when it might have not been able to balance, and 911 didn't come. And yes, rest in peace, Mr. McCarver. But I think that could have played a role, because I had a very similar experience. Luckily, I had the perfect environment. Luckily, I had people around me watching me. Luckily, I was in a documentary. Luckily, I knew exactly what to do and knew all the rules of insulin. But that could have played out very fucking differently, and it's no fucking joke what I just discussed. If I was alone, if I was in a remote area, if I misjudged the dosage, if I had no carbs in the house, or I had a candy bar, that's not gonna fucking cut it. I was drinking gallons of juice, tons of gummy bears to balance it. That could have easily been extremely bad in the wrong scenario, without people around me, without carbs around me. I don't know how that would have ended up, but I did want to discuss it. Appreciate everyone following me. Please share my channel so more people subscribe. Otherwise, I hope everyone is well. I will see you guys in my next video.